The biggest mistake that employers make is underestimating the degree of change that the veteran is going to experience after leaving service and coming into a civilian organization. Stop asking what their MOS was, which stands for Military Occupational Specialty, and making the assumption that they want to continue to do that. If you want it to be successful, it can't be a veteran hiring strategy. It needs to be a veteran employment strategy.
Welcome back to Talent Hunters, where we explore insights and trends shaping the global recruiting and staffing industry. Want to build talented teams that drive your company toward big goals and big growth? Then this podcast is for you. And now, let's join the conversation with today's episode of Talent Hunters, brought to you by HireQuest. Connect with us at hirequest.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Vince Holt, the host of Talent Hunters. Today we have Emily Grantinetta, CEO and President of the Grantinetta Group, located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Grantinetta Group works across industry and business sectors to bring the power of coaching to leaders and their teams. For many years, though, Emily's passion has been supporting military personnel successfully transitioning to the business leadership roles. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Vince.
So I have to tell you that this topic is a personal passion of mine, and I want to thank you for taking the time with us to discuss this. So start this thing off with, what drew you to wanting to focus on helping our military to civilian transition into the corporate world?
Oh, it's a great question. I'm not a veteran either, Vince, so we share that. And while I do have some in my family, it really was kind of brought to me. It wasn't anything that I sought out. I was an internal organization consultant for a huge defense contracting organization many years ago. And they came to me and they said, we have a problem. We're spending a lot of time and money with these strategic hires out of the military, and they're failing. And not only are they failing, but they're failing on leadership. We thought hiring officers, we'd be good with that. So you need to figure out what's going on and fix it. That's your job. So I was intrigued, and so I took it on and did a study and found, this was many, many years ago, before military transition was a thing. And I found in the study that it's really, really different leading in the military than it is in the civilian world. And nobody talks about that. And I talked to the employers, and they said, well, no, we don't want to insult anyone's intelligence. They were officers, so they come in, and it's like, wow, there's a lot that isn't said. And so both the officer and the employer were bringing all these assumptions and expectations to the table that were unexpressed. No wonder it was a problem. So I developed a program for them, at the first ever veteran onboarding program. It was hugely successful, had an immediate impact. And I became kind of the go-to to help people get on the rails who were off the rails. And most of them were for cultural reasons. It had nothing to do with their ability to lead or to be an effective professional. It was all about that cultural transition and context transition. So I wrote my master's thesis to validate what I learned at that company with all the other defense contractors in the DC market. And lo and behold, they all had the same experience, and they were all the same reasons. And so then I thought, this is something. This is a thing. And no one else is looking at it. And so I think that it was kind of fascinating to me academically, but what was even more compelling for me, Vince, was that talking to these former officers who had gone through this experience of early failure in their civilian careers, it was just heartbreaking. It just grabbed me right by the heart, because it was needless. It was needless suffering. And so when, at the end of the day, this is why I do the work. It's because it's a disconnect that still exists all these years later. And it does not just officers, but all, veteran hires have a transition process to go through that they may not even realize they're going through, and nobody prepares them. So we're prepared.
Let's talk about the employer side. What have you discovered are some of the misconceptions that employers maybe have hiring veterans?
Ooh, great question. So many misconceptions. One is that the biggest mistake that employers make is estimating the degree of change that the veteran is going to experience after leaving service and coming into a civilian organization. They just simply don't realize. It's not like any other hire. They don't have tacit knowledge they're bringing from a previous civilian employer. All of the things that we take for granted, they don't know. And they're very, very ingrained in a very particular way of doing things. And so underestimating that is a mistake that both the employer and the veteran makes. The veteran tends to think, oh, I'm really good at change and adapting. We do it every 3 years in the military. We change duty station. It'll be just like that. Not just like that. It's nothing like that. And so that's the biggest misconception that employers have. Another one they have is that all veterans have PTSD, and that's not workable. That's just completely baseless and ridiculous and diminishing to the veteran. And, PTSD can happen to any of us. It's a natural human response to a trauma. And so, you know what I mean? It's gotten some headlines around that, but most of the veterans coming into the market now as job candidates didn't serve in combat. So get that one, just do away with that one once and for all. That doesn't exist. Another misconception they tend to have is that veterans need to be micromanaged. They need to be told exactly what to do. They're used to being told exactly what to do, and we just don't have time for that. We need people who can add value from day one, et cetera. And that is a wrong-headed idea. Yes, veterans are coming from an organization where things are very explicit, very specific, and clear in terms of instruction. However, I know, by the way, that's not a bad thing. Civilian organizations could learn a thing or two by being a little clearer in their tasking, right? And, articulation of outcomes and business outcomes, et cetera, for any and all employees, but for veterans especially. And what they need parameters. They need, what is the goal of this task that I'm giving you? What are the parameters? In other words, on budget, on schedule, leveraging the following resources. But again, that is something that every employee needs when they're getting a task. So there's certain things that, yes, the veteran needs to be smarter about, and we're working daily to close that gap of information. But the employer could also take a lesson or two from a few things. Of course, not all things. The military has its own reason for being, and it's very different from a for-profit organization, for example. But when it comes to, the way that leaders lead and managers lead, there's a lot that can be learned. And the very basic one of all is be clear in your tasking, parameters, and goals.
So promoting communication. It's interesting you bring that up, because I feel like in the case of military, the military leaders are given direction, and they give direction to their subordinates. And in the military, it's do it this way or else. And I'm overstating that, obviously. Corporate America is way different than that. But to your point, the parameters give that flexibility, whether it's the leader or the followers, from the standpoint of if we're better communicating and helping these people make this transition, because it is a different world, without a doubt. What are some examples that you could give us of what you feel a corporation could do to help a veteran leader, let's start with first, transitioning to corporate America?
Well, they have to recognize that the veteran leader hasn't had the benefit of any kind of process of figuring out what they want and need from their job. They're simply hoping that their credential from the military, their rank and their accomplishments will attract the right employers with the right roles. they haven't gone through a reflection process to figure out, okay, yes, I'd like to be doing this kind of work in this kind of an environment. I don't want this. It's more than a paycheck. I also need to feel the following things. You know what I mean? And so they haven't gone through that process. Employers in their recruitment process and attraction process could do a better job of drawing that out of the candidate so that they're making a good informed decision. And this is something that we cover in depth in our own military. We have a program called the Accelerated Military Transition Program for veterans. And we're hoping that employers will just, job out their onboarding to us because we know how to do it and we can do it right. A big part of it is making a good choice of employer based on information and insight that the veteran typically doesn't have. So that's one thing. Another thing is doing a better job of articulating what it's like to work there in the recruiting process, expectations. Here's what excellence looks like here for someone at your level doing this job. Here's what a typical day might be like. These are the kinds of decisions you'll be empowered to make. These are the kinds of, this is what initiative means in our organization. Here's how it looks. So being what we call a cultural translator, so doing a better job of that. And we train HR professionals, recruiters to do that, among other things. So those are a couple things. And then finally, I think there are two final things that an employer really needs to do a better job of. One is preparing the receiving hiring manager who's going to hire the veteran and give them some situational awareness, to use a military term. And the second is to provide adequate onboarding, optimal onboarding. Right now, most veterans who are employed by a company get thrown into the same onboarding orientation training program that everybody does. So they're sitting there with college grads and, just every mix of people. And there are some pretty funny stories about their reaction to that. They're not pretty. So, just organizations need to be much, much smarter. They're not protecting the investment they're making in hiring veterans, And so that's what we're here to do, is protect that investment for them.
Could you give us a couple of interview questions that companies should stop asking veterans?
They should stop asking what their MOS was, which stands for Military Occupational Specialty, and making the assumption that they want to continue to do that. So this is a big gap that happens is an employer will see, or the applicant tracking system will pick out a veteran as a potential candidate. They'll look at the most recent MOS, Military Occupational Specialty, and they'll start looking for similar jobs. Meanwhile, service members don't get to choose usually their MOS. They test into it, or they're selected for it, and they may not want anything to do with that. But if all they have coming at them are offers to do the exact same thing they just did in the military, then they may end up just taking it and being miserable. And that's one of the factors that contributes to job churn, because veterans do go through about 3 times as many jobs before they find one that they want to stick with compared to non-veteran job candidates. And they also are 3 times as more likely to be underemployed. Meaning, again, their choice of job and employer was not as informed as it should have been to protect the veteran and the employer in terms of retention.
That's so profound, because here I am, a lifetime recruiter, and owned a business. And I always thought, I only had the opportunity once, but I always thought that, gosh, if I was to hire a military vet that was a recruiter, it might give them a heads up on this. But what you just suggested is brilliant, because this goes into the corporate sector too, hiring just somebody off an assembly line, thinking they still want to be an assembler. That's such a profound idea there. So how would you, or what question would you want corporations or employers to ask a veteran?
What are the things that you love to do? What are the things that you're really good at that make you feel satisfied? And what's kind of an environment you want to have around you when you're doing that? So think beyond your most recent military MOS. What are other roles you've had in the military that you really, really enjoyed? Tell me about those. What were you doing? What were you responsible for? What did good look like? What did great look like? Those are the kinds of things, because they may, especially the typical stereotypical example is, well, we've got an infantryman coming into the civilian market and we don't need infantrymen and we're not shooting anybody and that's all they know how to do. Well, I guarantee you that is not all they know how to do, because from day one in basic training, every service member is beginning to learn about leading others. Okay, now they're not learning how to do it in a civilian environment, which is, my premise is fundamentally different. However, they are learning to give tasking clearly, to oversee the work, quality of work, to get results, to make sure all the people who need it have their training, to make sure, you know what I mean? It's an environment of care and feeding. As much as we think of military leaders as gruff and barking orders and all of that, they are the commanders are leading troops that they care for, and it's their responsibility to care for them in ways that a civilian manager won't and can't, because there are laws around how much mingling of work and life a manager should and could get involved in, right? But in the military, it's more like a family. And so the other thing I think a recruiter needs to know is, and not so that they can sell the job, but so that they can find a good fit, is recognize that veterans of any branch are coming from an environment where there was the ability to trust without question. It's part of the culture. It's baked in. And also where there was a real strong feeling of community, like nothing we really experience in the civilian world, because we don't live where we work, but they do. And so do their families, right?
Yeah, plus the fact that their lives depend on the relationships, literally.
Well, they do. It's different, though. I mean, yes, their lives do. Even in peacetime, when they're going through training exercises, we hear about this in the news all the time. So people can lose their lives. So that is a very, very real aspect of military service, which is why that trust needs to be unquestioned. And it starts from the very beginning by going through basic training together. And it's very, very frowned upon. And there are real consequences for a veteran who breaks trust with another, not for a service member who breaks trust with their comrade. So none of those things exist in the civilian workforce. But the one thing that I think is a nuance.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. And boy, you're painting a picture that I don't think very many people really realize.
Nobody does. We're the only people. Right now, we're the only people, coaches, consultants, whatever you want to call it, the only people who are bringing this, what I call psychosocial aspect of military transition into awareness. It's why I spent the summer speaking at conferences and will probably continue to, and why I have 2 books on the subject, because I'm a behavioral scientist. This is you know what I mean? I'm a master certified coach. And so this is kind of my world. But until I can scale all of this, which I'm trying to do, I'll be, only able to affect a small number of people, and have had tremendous success with the folks that I've worked with. So not to make this about me, but there is nobody else out there who's talking about military transition or hiring veterans through the lens of the psychosocial aspects and from the employer's perspective. almost anyone you see in the market who's talking about hiring veterans and promoting the hiring of veterans is coming from the veterans' perspective. And that is not helpful to the employer because it's underinformed, it's uninformed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And it's something that I can guarantee you your perception is 100%. There's no doubt. But what's a practical starting point for building a veteran hiring strategy, do you think?
Well, I spent a lot of years doing this for companies. And I would say that if you want it to be successful, it can't be a veteran hiring strategy. It needs to be a veteran employment strategy. So it needs to start and continue through the entire employee life cycle. Meaning from the moment that we draw them in and encounter them and attract them as a candidate, to the way we handle them in our recruiting process, to the way we onboard them, that is a pivot point. You got to get that onboarding right if you want to retain them. To the way we prepare the managers who will be managing them, to the way that we explain and execute our performance management process and career pathing and all of that, to the way we promote and develop careers internally, to the way we reward, recognize, and ultimately part ways and have a beautiful alumni relationship. Like, it has to include all of that. Otherwise, there's so many breakage points, and so what I don't want to do is scare people off and have employers think, oh, this is too hard, it's going to be too expensive. It's not, and it doesn't have to be. This is work that we've been doing for decades now. Trust me, it doesn't have to be hard, but it has to start with a recognition that I don't see evidence of now on the employer's part, which is we have to protect the investment that we're making. There's a lot of flag waving, a lot of people saying, we want to hire veterans because it's the right thing to do, and they're this and they're that, and then they spout up a bunch of stereotypes about veterans. But the fact is, if you're a for-profit business, you need to protect that hiring investment. If I'm an investor in your company and you're hiring veterans and letting them just go off and sink or swim on their own, I'm not investing in your company anymore because you're not protecting me. Does that make sense?
Without a doubt. So let's flip it a little bit, because we've talked a lot about the employer responsibility here. So how does your team help a veteran day one start making that transition? What does your coaching focus on to begin with?
Well, we have a very well-tested and proven model of military transition, and it's a framework that says these are the stages you're going to go through, and here's what to expect at each stage. Here's how to accelerate your progress through each stage. Here are the watch-outs at each stage, and this is what good looks like at each stage. And so... And we are very skilled and experienced in coaching around that model. Anybody, wherever they are in that process. But the model hasn't even been accepted broadly, even though it was in the very first book I wrote, fully explained. This was in 2012, my first book came out. And so what we're, one of my premises is that to be really effective in a meaningful and accelerated way with veterans, the coach has to skill themselves up in this area, because it's a very particular way of coaching. And if you just bring the way that you coach any executive or any person to a veteran, there are a number of things that will happen to slow the process down or bring it to a complete halt. All right. So that's what we teach coaches. So we have an industry accredited training program for ICF certified coaches. It's the only one that exists. We're the only we're the only holder of industry accredited training on this topic. We also have an accreditation with SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management, where we train HR folks. So we're trying to just flood the zone in all the areas where we have influence, because what we're finding is that trying to turn the military's boat around is not, I'm too old for that, and I don't have the intestinal fortitude to do it. However, there are intervention points that I can influence, and that's where we're focused. So with veterans, a lot of times the veteran doesn't seek us out for coaching, because the veteran doesn't seek out help until they have a pain point. And usually that's when they've already had 1 or 2 civilian jobs and they've hated it, and they've made a million mistakes and they are regretting that they left the military. It's when they have that point of pain is when they realize they need us. Where most of our clients come from is from the HR department of a company who has hired veterans and they're having issues. They're either not able to engage them, or the veterans is demonstrating an inability to change that command and control style from the military. Well, of course they have a hard time doing that. Nobody's taught them to do it. And oh, by the way, employers, if you think you want to hire veterans because they're leaders, recognize that they're bringing a command and control approach to leading into your firm. Is that what you want? I'm not saying don't hire them. You'll never have a better leader. However, there is a learning curve. So if you're going to hire veterans, you got to know that if you want to retain them. And I'll say the same thing to the veteran.
So since you started this many years ago, how do you feel the veteran landscape has changed in this transition process?
Well,
or has it?
It's changed quite a bit and not at all. Both. The ways that it's changed is that we are not in a time of great patriotism the way we were 15 years ago, 12 years ago, when, droves of veterans were coming back from active conflict and we were getting used to seeing, amputees, and we were getting, you know what I mean? It was a time of great patriotism. And so that's not there. And there's more of a reluctance on the part of the employer to kind of hire veterans in some cases, because maybe they feel burned by these, experiences that they could have prevented but didn't, right? Because they didn't know how. And the veteran likely has not, veterans, currently service members don't tend to stay as long. They don't sign up for multiple tours of duty over and over and over again until they've been in for 25, 30 years. Certainly those people are coming into the job market, out of service into the job market, because when you retire in the military, you're like 45 years old. There's time for a whole second career, and there's a desire in many cases for a whole second career, right? Because rank correlates with age in the military, unlike the civilian world. So that's a difference. They may not be as entrenched in military culture because they haven't served as long, but it is all they know, probably. They're of a different generation, so they bring that component to it also. Those are some ways that they're different. The ways that they're not different is they still have to go through this transition process, which is a personal transformation. It's a psychosocial process. It has an inside part that you have to do with a coach or somebody who can help you do that, so you know who you are without the uniform. Because loss of identity is huge, and it's not unique. It is widely reported. And then there's an external part, which is where you're in a work environment and you're trying to make sense of it, and you're trying to figure out I'm bringing all my military ways of working and skills and tools, and they're not working here. You know what I mean? So there's that process. And then there's the process of, just growing as a person so that you can integrate these two parts of yourself, the military part, not doing away with that. It's tremendously valuable and valid. And the part that can be a successful civilian. And that is truly the end goal of having a smooth and successful military transition, means that you end up integrated so that you are fully contributing to your civilian organization, not by ignoring your military experience, but by integrating it into this new way.
You brought up a couple of different scenarios. You painted two pictures to me. And one of them, and this is the one I looked at first, somebody coming out of the military, I'm thinking 4-6 years. And then you brought like a slap in the face, the veteran that is retiring from the military, that's been in it for 20, 25 years. And I think back, so what's changed in corporate America in the last 20 to 25 years? Everything. I mean, from technology to people wanting to work from home to people not wanting to relocate. Obviously, all this brought on by COVID, but the reality is that it's changed so dramatically. And I see, as you were talking, real benefits from the military veteran that regardless of how long they've been in there, they're not used to being in any one place for any extended length of time. So if I'm looking for somebody that wants to be part of my company and potentially through questioning, proper questioning, might be flexible to move around. But again, you said it right at the very beginning. It really is about questioning the person, the veteran, about what did they enjoy? What do they like? What do they dislike? What do they want to do? And I think you're right. I think there's so many people today, they get their resumes done by AI. They don't do their own resumes. And the first interview, and this is what I'm hearing from corporations, the first interview is AI. And I think you're right. I don't think anything's been programmed in at all about how to deal with the veterans because they haven't been brought up in the corporate America style. So you got a heck of a challenge ahead of you.
Well, I mean, the good news is I have had tremendous success in the last 25 years with veterans and their employers. So I have tools and roadmaps and frameworks, and I know what works. I know what the pitfalls are going to be. And I've tried to share them with the world through my 2 books. My second one came out last November. So I'm not trying to hoard it, but we do need to scale it. And what I've learned is that writing a book about it is not the way to scale it. And so this is why we've pivoted our business strategy. And now we're really focused on training groups of people who are in a position to make a real difference. That's the onboarding training that we provide for organizations. We can make it easy for you. And the coach training so that, any company that hires a lot of veterans, especially if they're hiring big corporations like in the defense industry or biotech or aviation, any of those, they retain coaches for some of their leaders. Well, those coaches need to be trained in this particular way. So we're training coaches and certifying coaches. And then everyone else, the HR folks, the advocates who are like working at the state veteran job centers, like they need to be trained. They are not adequately trained. So we're trying to use what levers we can, recognizing that, the military thinks it's doing an okay job with this. It isn't. And we're going to have to crack some eggs. I get it. But, why not leverage what's proven, right? It's common sense to me. So the good news is we're having really, really great uptake on all 3 fronts for those courses. And that means that, we're putting informed, capable helpers into the workplace. And that's what's needed.
Well, something, and I'm sure it's crossed your desk a few times, but something you may consider is there's a lot of independent recruiters out there that work specifically with veterans. And having a program out there that somehow get the word out that and I know you've stood on stage in front of companies and corporations and so forth, but if there was one that was specifically for how recruiters could help both sides, it might help expand the message you're trying to get out there, because they're talking to both sides and coaching in that recruitment. And I'm not talking about a corporate recruiter. I'm talking about that independent recruiter. They've got a reputation to build with the company. They got a reputation to build with the candidates. So it might be a good venue to pursue and standing in front of those people too.
Oh yeah. You're right. And it's always been look at me. I'm like, use whatever toy I have on my desk. This flash drive. It's always been my belief that one of these days, a smart recruiting firm or placement firm or veteran, whatever, is going to realize that they can differentiate themselves from everybody else in the market by partnering with us, because then they will be able to say, our candidates are ready, really ready.
Well, I can tell you, we here at HireQuest, we hold the military very close to us. I mean, for the last 20 years, every May, we have celebrated military service by honoring a fallen veteran or somebody that has served life within the military and so forth. And it's something that we're very, very close to. And this conversation, Emily, is please don't ever give up on it. Stay young, stay forthright, stay after this, because you're hitting something that is extremely needed. And I'm telling you this from my heart. I love what you're doing. And please keep fighting the good fight. And thank you so much for sharing what you do with us today.
Oh, it's a total pleasure. And thank you. Thank you for caring, and thank you for having me. And I do believe it's going to take a village, but we can do this. So let's do it.
Yeah. Keep at it, kid. Keep at it.